Awesome. Thanks, Roberta. Good evening, everybody. This is the Wednesday, May 27th, 2026 meeting of the City of Somerville Community Preservation Committee. I'm the chair, Ryan Kirchhoff. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2025, this meeting of the Somerville Community Preservation Committee will be conducted via remote participation. We'll have a video recording available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. Roberta, could you please call the roll?
Sure. David Turin,
Here.
Michael, Mike
Here.
McNally. Yep. I don't see Rona yet. Joe Capuano,
Yeah.
John Kent.
Here.
Mary Jo said that she would not be able to make it this evening. Carlos Ayala. Sorry, we couldn't hear your audio, Carlos.
I am present. Can you hear me
Great, thank you. Now we can hear
Awesome.
you. Great. And Eric Parks. Eric, is your audio working?
Negative. Sorry to report, Eric.
We see he's here. Hopefully,
He is
he can
present.
he can give us hand signals to let us know if he needs to talk later. Ryan Kirikov.
Present.
All right.
Very good. Thank you. All right. First matter of business is the approval of a backlog of meeting minutes from February 25th, March 25th, and April 22nd. Does anybody have any questions or comments about any of those meeting minutes? Okay. Roberta, do we need to do three separate motions to approve these, or can we get them in one fell swoop?
I will leave that to your discretion.
Okay, I guess since we don't have any comments, I would welcome a motion to approve the meeting minutes for all three dates considered, February 25th, March 25th, and April 22nd, 2026.
I will make such a motion.
Thank you. And anyone second?
I can second that motion.
Thanks, Carlos. Roberta, please call the roll.
Yeah. David Turin,
Yes.
Michael McNally,
Abstain.
Joe Capuano,
Yes.
John Kent,
Yep.
Carlos Ayala,
Yes.
Eric Parks.
Yes. Can you hear me
And
now?
yes, we
All
heard
right.
you that time.
Good.
And Ryan Kirikov.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Thank you for that, Roberta. The next item is the plan update. And we will start with reviewing the financial report. Roberta, would you want to share your screen?
Sure. Let me take a moment to open the report. And so in your meeting packet is the FY27 draft community preservation plan, which I hope to finalize this evening. Well, finalize pending the numbers, which I will explain to you in a moment. So I'll walk you through this. A lot of it is content that we covered in the annual public hearing. Hello, I see that Rona just joined us.
Yes.
A lot of what is in the plan is what we covered in the annual public hearing last month. And now I would like to go over the financial portion of the plan, which is what the committee will be asked to make a decision on this evening. So, skimming through the plan, this is updated every year. Some of the data changes, some of it stays the same. I always tweak it to make sure that the information stays up to date. So if you've read the plan before, it's very similar to what it has been. The first section is an introduction to the CPA program, and the committee explains what it is that we do. And then the second section, well, the first section is the introduction, then section 1 is the CPA funding section. And this starts with a explanation of what our funding has looked like and how the committee has spent CPA funds over the last decade plus. And this I also presented at the last meeting, so I'm not going to present all of this data again this evening. But I describe in more detail what the revenue and spending looked like over this time. And this table provides it.
I do have can I interrupt with just a real quick
Yes,
question? And I was
please.
actually just looking at my notes. Let's see. I see on the top of page 4 that it reflects the revision we made in the bonding authority for the Kennedy School project. Yeah, the
Yeah.
first
Okay,
paragraph that starts to date. Yep.
yeah.
So it reflects that revision, but the 140,000 in annual debt is what I thought might be the number when it was $2 million.
I will highlight this and I will check it to make
Yeah,
sure.
I meant to go back to my notes to check, but then you were moving on, so I figured I'd just throw it out as this placekeeper.
Thank you for highlighting that, and I will go back and fact check it.
Cool.
Appreciate your picking that up.
Thanks both.
And so a description of the projects that we funded last year. And I'm still waiting for data on that would enable me to fill in the table on leveraged funding, waiting for the housing data in particular. And these, in the version that you see, it's still highlighted, but actually I did receive the updated maps today. So the things that are highlighted in green were awaiting data. And so these have been updated. And so section 2 is the section that I'd like to walk through with you this evening, talking about the estimated revenue that we anticipate for FY27. Right now, we're working with preliminary numbers because the finance department, the folks downstairs, not the OSPCD finance department, would like to get more data from the assessor before making estimates for all of our city tax revenues for the year. So they're anticipating that they're going to be providing final numbers in June. And meanwhile, we still needed to be able to pass a budget at this meeting of the CPC. So Alan and I worked together to develop the best estimate that we could of what we think the funding is going to look like for this year. I don't think there's going to be any big difference between our best estimate and the official numbers that are going to come out in a few weeks. So I will be asking you after we walk through the annual plan to come back and vote on the funding distribution based on our estimates. So the preliminary estimate is a total of $8.3 million for FY27, including $7.2 million in estimated surcharge revenue and $1.1 million state match. The state match this year will be seeing for the first time that Somerville will be receiving funds from the second round state match. So each year, the state has a pool of funds that are available, and they give the same distribution, a percentage to every community that participates in the CPA program. But then there's what they call the second round distribution that only goes to 3% communities. And so this year we will qualify as a 3% community for the first time. And unlike the straight percentage from the first distribution, the second distribution is a really complicated formula that I trust there even is a formula. It's so I have no idea how they calculate it. So we will find out when it comes what our second distribution will look like. It might be minuscule or it might be significant or somewhere in between. So this 1.1 million is based on the first round distribution. So it may be a conservative estimate. And I'm going to sneeze, but not yet. Sorry. Um, so I've run a calculation applying last year's percentages to the preliminary estimate and have shown in table 5 here in the report what that would look like. But we'll come back and talk about this again after we look at the rest of the report. And so I've identified just digesting some of what we've heard over the last year, a few points that I wanted to raise based on all of the feedback that we've received during our annual review, that there's a demonstrated need to invest in all of the CPA focus areas, but the most critical need is for affordable housing, as has been established in the city's planning documents and expressed by residents. Public input consistently rates open space and outdoor recreation as a high priority, given the city's density and scarcity of public open space. A significant share of requests for historic preservation funds have been to make buildings safe and accessible, supporting cultural facilities, childcare, food access programs, and other social services, and immigrant communities. These types of projects align with the CPC's overall priorities that we see later in the plan. And finally, the undesignated and flexible reserve provide flexibility for the CPC to award grants that meet the greatest community need after seeing the range of applications submitted in the funding round. So those are similar to the points we've heard in the past and were the basis for how we got to the distribution percentages that that we saw we've used in the past. So the next section, allowable projects, is a perennial section. It really doesn't change. This is based on the enabling legislation given by the state. And so the next section, section 4, articulates our Community Preservation Act priorities. And first, I've identified these priorities based on other plans that the city has prepared and my communication with other stakeholders and city departments and numerous people that are cited in the following sections. So the first plan that we look at is Summer Vision 2040. And this Somerville's shared values is quoted from Summer Vision 2040. So describing the values that drive the investments that we make with CPA funds and strategic choices, allowing projects that are consistent with community values and that make a strategic use of CPA funding. And then we articulate priorities by category. And then there's a section that provides context for each of the categories and reviews the planning that's been done and the work that's being done across the city departments related to each of our program areas. That can be helpful for the committee to take into consideration when you're evaluating applications that we receive. So I'll skip through this because a lot of this I skimmed in last month's presentation as well. But what I do want to spend some time on, I'll come back. So section 5 is a section that I want to spend time on, and I will come back to that. First, I'll talk a little bit about public and stakeholder engagement. I gave you a summary of last year's public and stakeholder engagement in last month's presentation because I was still in the process of obtaining public input last month, and I wanted to leave some room to hear a little bit more from folks before I closed the survey and digested all of the input that we received. So some types of stakeholder and public engagement included the annual public hearing last month tabling at locations and events throughout summer and fall last year and winter and spring this year. Surveys that were available online and in print and on the Summer Voice page, and meetings and collaboration with city staff from numerous departments. I'm not going to read all of this, obviously, but I just wanted to skim through this and see of all of the tabling events, all of the tabling events, we have the poster that invites people to show how they would prioritize spending by putting stickers in the different program areas. And what did we hear from that? Affordable housing ranked 43%, actually a little bit lower than it has been in the past, but only a little bit lower, and still a similar correlation of between open space recreation and historic preservation. This has been a very typical breakdown of the priorities that people express to us. And I give all of the comments if you feel like taking a long time to read through them. There are lots of interesting ideas that people have. And we got very little engagement with the Summer Voice page this past year. I'm thinking of maybe revamping the Summer Voice page going forward. I don't know if we'll use it as much as an engagement tool in the future because it's been very low engagement, but I may use it to be able to provide information to people so that they can learn more about CPA projects and follow the CPA application calendar. So that's in the back of my mind. We'll talk about that more when I get to the section of the plan that talks about action plans for the CPC. So the online survey representation from all around the community. And people share with us which of the assets are they familiar with, have they used over the past year. That also maybe gives us an idea of what kinds of assets really get a lot of traffic by a lot of residents in the city. And have people participated in any public engagement over the last year? And quite a lot of people participated in art farm engagement. So you'll also see a lot of a lot of comments on the survey from Art Farm. I think that there was a big push to get Art Farm proponents to respond to the survey. And we ask what kinds of housing projects have people experienced or know people who have worked with. And finally, this is what I'm looking for, funding area program distribution. What we heard from the survey, about 46% of funding toward affordable housing, 34% toward open space and recreation, and 20% toward historic preservation. Again, very consistent with what we heard in the tabling events. So now I'm going to back up a little bit to section 5 of I think I skipped it. That's housing. Section 5, Community Preservation Committee FY27 action goals. So the action goals are kind of identifying what are the steps that I should be doing in particular to support the committee over the next year, and what are some goals that the committee has for program improvement. So for example, last year we identified a need to hire a consultant to prepare the guidelines, historic preservation guidelines that we've worked on in the past year. Having completed that project, we're looking ahead at what are some ways that we can make some program improvements going forward. And in conversations with city staff, we identified that the historic preservation area could benefit from long-term visioning through the development of a cultural heritage plan, which could guide public investment in historic preservation and align with broader historic preservation goals and policies. The plan would include an analysis of existing conditions, policies, and procedures, coordination with the city's existing plans, and public engagement. And the um, the Planning, Preservation, and Zoning team of OSPCD is in the process of preparing an RFP. And a reason that I'm highlighting this particularly for the CPC is because they would be looking for CPA admin funding to support this effort. The CPA admin funding would help the historic preservation plan would help the CPC to better target historic preservation projects to the areas where they're most needed, by identifying what are the city's needs and goals for historic preservation. We're also working on interactive mapping. I think I mentioned earlier, wanting to update the Summer Voice page that we have, and we might be able to incorporate, there is some interactive mapping there now, but we could incorporate a database of all of our projects into that page so that people could learn more about what we've done. And maybe have that linked directly from our web page, so we could do better coordination across departments, across other city staff, and integrated mapping could also help us to implement those historic preservation guidelines monitoring by integrating with other departments that are involved in permitting. So that's another goal, and that's something we don't need to necessarily hire a consultant for this mapping. The city has tools, and I'm working on developing proficiency with those tools so that I can fill this in. Ryan.
I'm curious about if you go back up to the first bullet point for potential consultant engagement,
Yeah.
the cultural heritage plan. So, is part of the task here to identify for the city what publicly owned assets might be good candidates for CPC funds, or maybe just help me think through, like, because I guess we've gotten a handful of privately owned historic preservation projects that have come in the door. How would this help guide those conversations? Is it just about geography, or
So
I think about
the cultural heritage plan would be looking at historic assets across the city, privately owned and publicly owned. Identify what are the characteristics that make historic, like some historic properties more important or less important than others. What are the characteristics that we're actually trying to preserve? So, for example, we have applications for different kinds of private residences like we've seen in the past. And the plan could provide some guidance of how to prioritize applications for private residences, business storefronts, nonprofit organizations, or city-owned properties. And I think be able to help us identify the projects that will have the greatest impact toward meeting the city goals and values.
okay. And the historic commission, Eric, is this kind of in their purview as well? I mean, I think it sounds like what you just described, that CPC, CPA funds is a logical home for this, I guess, but I'm wondering if there's if there's overlap with any other groups within the city that would benefit from this.
Yeah, we don't, as a commission, tend to embrace like macro issues too much. We don't really seem to have the energy or bandwidth. So we tend to be somewhat reactive to projects that come to us.
And that's part of the goal of this cultural heritage plan is also to enable the Historic Preservation Commission to have a broader vision of what the what historic preservation needs are. So there would also be a regulatory component to the cultural heritage plan, which would not be CPA funded. It would need to have funding from both the city and the CPC to be able to answer the question of regulatory changes as well as investment.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thanks
At some
for
point,
clarifying that.
sort of externally to this commission, we need to wrap our heads around all the various efforts, because I think there's a cultural heritage plan. I think there was a preservation, another document that was either prepared or was supposed to get prepared that I think people are not happy with.
Yeah, that was back in, I think, 2017. There was an
Yeah.
effort to prepare a historic preservation plan, which was entirely funded by CPA. And at that time, it was never completed. In fact, there were two false starts and then they gave up. So,
So I'm a little fuzzy on exactly how many parallel efforts we have to, but to answer your original question there, Ryan, that yeah, this is something that ideally we'd be involved with, but we haven't been involved. It's being initiated here rather than in our own commission.
Understood. Okay. Thanks for that.
yeah. A couple of other things. There's we'd love to see a goal of better articulating the impact of CPA projects, especially looking at how uh, um, how the CPA program has touched different populations across the city and evaluating past and prospective projects through the lens of equitability and inclusivity. So this is something that has actually been on our list of goals for a while, and I think maybe some of the work that's going on in these other areas can help us to identify how we can proceed um, with that effort. The Historic Preservation Guidelines Project identified a need to bridge coordination between the HPC and the Community Preservation Commission regarding roles and responsibilities for preservation restrictions, local historic districts, and CPA grant agreements. So I think that this is not going to affect the committees so much as the staff who support these committees. But we need to develop new monitoring procedures and collaboration between the CPC staff and the PPZ staff to be able to fulfill those responsibilities with more clarity than we've done in the past. And finally, I'm sorry.
Roberta, I'm picking nits. Is there a community preservation commission or is that us?
That's you. Sorry.
Okay, got it. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Just making sure I wasn't missing another group lurking out there. Okay.
They have
All right.
$9 million.
What'd you say, Dave?
They have $9 million.
If only. Updating city policies to promote recruitment and retention of diverse, qualified, and dedicated committee members is a goal of the city's appointment advisory committee that they are working on as we speak. And it touches all of the boards and committees that are represented on the CPC. HPC in particular has had long-standing vacancies. And there's a need to update HPC's ordinances, I think, in order to overcome some structural reasons why they've had those vacancies. But other boards and committees as well, just looking to see how we can support making sure that they have members who will serve on the CPC when the time comes, as our ultimate goal. So those are the goals that I've developed in conversation with city staff, but I'm very interested in your feedback on these goals and if you have additional thoughts and ideas that you'd like to contribute to our to-do list for the next year. All right. Well, I think that brings us back to the next item on our agenda. That was reviewing program goals and potential FY27 uses of the admin budget. So the next item on the agenda is to vote on the annual CPC budget. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and I'm going to pull, and of course, with respect to the goals that I've just mentioned, I'm always open to feedback from all of you all. So this was not your one and only chance to air your ideas.
Understood. Thanks for your work pulling this together.
Yeah.
Some really good ideas.
And
So while Roberta's pulling that up, for folks that are newer this year, last year we did make a change to the CPA budget allocations. We basically were able to carve out an additional 5%. Somebody correct me if I'm not remembering right, but 5% of our budget was pivoted into the affordable housing set aside, bringing us to the 55% that we had this year. We were at 50% the year before that. And that was, as memory serves for me, mostly just in reaction to public feedback, to Somerville planning documents, to general agreement that, you know, the overwhelming perceived highest priority need for the city was affordable housing, and we were attempting to be responsive to that. So I'm curious to hear how folks think that went within the last funding year, whether you felt constrained by that, you know, given that we're uh, basically foregoing our own decision-making process to review projects on that 55% of funds by giving it to the Affordable Housing Trust, or if that was appropriate, or if there's some other change that you would propose this year. So anyway, first, just looking backwards, any thoughts or reactions on how this went last year?
I think it would be nice to have gotten like a report back to see how that additional 5%, like kind of what impact it made so that we could kind of weigh these changes. I do definitely feel not necessarily the impact of reduced funds on the open space side, but just looking at this year's proposals with Art Farm and some other projects and Kennedy being bonded, I just feel like there's a bigger need for open space elements. So I do wonder if there's a need to kind of increase the open space side. I don't know if that necessarily should come back from the historic or is from the uh, affordable housing, or if it should come from other sources. But it would be kind of nice to get a report back to see kind of how that additional 5% affected affordable housing.
I guess, I mean, folks, thank you, John, for the comment. I guess, Roberta, correct me if I'm wrong, but the update that we got from the Affordable Housing Trust did outline how the funds from last year were used. Obviously, the money is fungible, so it's difficult to point to one project and say that was the one that was driven by the 5%. But I think we do have some visibility to where that 55% went last year, right?
um, yeah, I would recall that last year was also the year that we had a bump from the 1.5% to 3%. So they didn't just get 5% more. They got 55% more. Um, so it um it's hard to show the exact comparison of how it's different last year versus this year. It's maybe a little bit uneven that we have that we have an applicant from for representing the open space and recreation side on the committee and not one from the Affordable Housing Trust serving on the committee who could answer the question, I think, with greater detail of what the impact is of the 5%.
Well, with when we took public feedback this year, it seemed like percentage-wise, the numbers you gave us was more evenly distributed between the affordable housing and open space. I saw like 45 and 38% or something, which is, I don't know how that compared to the previous year. And two general thoughts in weighing that is, I think we have two things to consider. One is the relative importance of those subjects, which the numbers are, referencing, and the other is the value of money towards that cause in a way. So if like affordable housing is a very important need, to what extent is an extra $1 million going to advance that goal versus open space or sort? So it's like which categories are we able to reap more for our money with, in a sense? If we're putting $500,000 into something that basically has no funding to begin with, it's doing a lot for them versus if it's going to get someone from 2 million, 200 million to 210 million or something. So that's just another consideration there. I'm not really answering the question about what should move them around. I personally feel like I've seen value in having a fairly nimble and large flex fund because we seem to do that a lot from year to year, where we have currently 10% or even more that could go all to one or the other, and it sort of keeps us more able to jump around from category to category because each year tends to be a little different.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in my years on the committee, we have always been somewhat flexible with how the money flows. Sometimes it requires, as you know, a vote to move funds from one bucket to another to make sure we're covering off our gaps. And we were lucky last year that we did have sufficient funds to cover pretty much every project that came in the door. But I do think that historically the way that we've divvied up the resources on the front end like this is somewhat it's a way to react to local priorities. I don't want to say it's symbolic, but it's a way to show how we're prioritizing the budget that we have, and obviously we can flow to the projects that come in the door depending upon what happens. But I think there's something to be said for planting a stake in the ground and and dedicating certain amounts to open space and recreation versus historic versus community housing. I think just to give a tiny bit of the history here, and Roberta, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, the 5% that we were able to get into community housing reserve, it was 2% each from open space and historic. Those were previously 20 and 15 respectively. And then 1% from the admin and operating expenses. In coming into last year, as Roberta mentioned, we had our big jump last fiscal year where we thought we were able to go from 5% to 4% on admin and operating expenses without damaging we actually grew the overall number for that line item because we were dealing with a bigger denominator. We lost the screen there, but yeah, I think that's where those came from. So to the extent that anybody was interested in making any changes, I just wanted to flag that could be an option, restoring some or all of those funds. Anybody with strong opinions on the 55% for community housing?
So what I'm kind of struck by in this conversation is kind of almost how Roberta kind of teed it up, which is, what do we think about how, the affordable housing money is being used, and And the short answer is I don't really know a lot of, I mean, we've kind of delegated that to the Affordable Housing Trust. And they do give us, the report. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm not really qualified to evaluate that. And to Eric's, point, I don't really know how to compare, what we're getting for $1 of affordable housing versus what we're getting for $1 in one of the other categories. Um, but that's just what this conversation made me think of. What I was originally thinking of was still related, but whether there's any other, like are there other organizations, town or otherwise, that are kind of auditing the housing trust and how they and what they do and how they do it? Just kind of from a fiduciary, perspective. Because I don't think we do it. Maybe we think we do it and we say we do it, but I'm not sure we do.
I'm really glad I let you go first. That was a really interesting point, is looking to some other third parties that are maybe a little bit better equipped to audit these things. Because I absolutely read the report and I do recall us having the presentations and stuff, but you're right. I'm definitely not an expert on affordable housing and whether or not this is an efficient application of funds. I also would be curious to know if there's some other third parties that we can look to that are already doing this, or whether or not there's some administration elements there that we should add to our docket to support this year, because I think that would help us feel good about the return on investment we have. I know it already gets outsized bang for our buck. I know we talked about leveraged funding previously, but it would be good to better understand that holistically. I guess if I'm allowed to steal the floor for just an extra minute, my perspective, as we've been looking at lots of upzoning requests and projects coming to the planning board that are generally MR4 and above, MR3 and above, we've seen that a lot of folks are meeting their green score requirements by way of private or unaccessible or otherwise unengageable green spaces. And so I just would also kind of echo John's comment earlier about maybe thinking a little bit about supporting that bucket, especially since I think that resource is going to become scarcer and scarcer to support in the long run with the pressures we're seeing for upzoning. So just again, looking at this from a macroscopic view, I would be interested in entertaining shifting a little bit of funding in that direction. And the last comment I'd make for this group, just to think about, is, this last year was my first year going through the process. And the thing that caught me off guard the most was the debt service conversation. I hadn't thought about that at all in the beginning of our kind of association of funds. And I think in hindsight, I would have been a little bit more thoughtful, or at least considerate of how the debt service could impact some of this funding. So just something I think that could be a good food for thought and conversation as we divvy this money up.
Thanks, Michael. That's a great reminder. I was going to ask, where is the Kennedy School debt service on the bond showing up?
It doesn't show up yet because it hasn't been drawn yet. One of the benefits of increasing the budget this year was that it would enable them to pay for the first year's work with the funding available before having to draw the bond.
Got it. So that may be another reason of consideration that, this open space and recreation, we got $1.5 million available under this regime, but even if we just held steady, it's going to be less than that because of the debt service that is going to kick in at some point. Is that fair, Roberta?
Correct.
And likely in the middle of this upcoming year, right? So will that chew into our available funds during the fiscal year?
Well, actually, Ryan, my understanding from the debt service conversation is it's already going to chew into it, that we need to treat it as if it was allocated.
Yeah, so
that was because that was something I asked about, and it was like, because they could, award it at any time, that money is supposed to be kind of set aside. I mean, Roberta, tell me if I remember that conversation incorrectly.
Actually, maybe if Alan is here, Alan could give us a primer on the timeline for paying for debt service.
Thank you, Roberta. Apologize for the t-shirt. This, yes,
You mean
so
you ever go home, Alan?
so it's a little bit of a nuanced answer, but mostly in line with what Roberta was describing. It's and a little bit what you were describing, David. So when the committee authorizes a bond issuance, say like in the case of Kennedy, I forget if it was 3 or 4 million. Um, Once the city council ratifies your vote, and that is an official bond authorization, at any time we can draw down those bond funds as we incur expenses on the project. Now, to Roberta's point, interest in principal or interest, depending on how the bond is structured, do not come due until we go out to market. And we, to sum it up in somewhat at a summary level, we try to be efficient in the way we go out to market. So, we don't go out to market for every little project we bond. We go out to market in large chunks and then allocate it down to the project level. Um, all that to be said, there's only probably a couple times a year where we make debt service payments. And it all depends on when we draw down on those projects. And so in this particular case, the bids just came back. We're hoping to have some sort of construction begin in the summer months. I'm sure John will give an update. Depending on when we actually start paying contractors or start incurring bond expenses, is when that bond debt service will hit the books. We're going to make our budget soon, so most likely you will see that reflected in next year's debt service when it'll actually hit the CPA. So it's a long-winded story. It all boils down to the bond authorization is not exactly the same timing as when the debt service obligation starts. Authorization just means that we can begin the project and issue bonds at any time. In reality, we actually start paying down those bonds after we've incurred actual expenses.
Okay. That's helpful.
So Alan, just to paraphrase though, then so A, it doesn't, there's no debt service until the bond is authorized by city council. There's no debt payment until it's drawn down.
That is correct.
And also the amount what the debt payment will be at this point is an estimate because you don't know what the interest payments will be until the bonds are purchased.
Correct.
So
and
what we have right now is kind of just a ballpark.
It's a ballpark, and it's mainly based on when we think we're going to incur projects on that project timeline. So most likely, again, a lot of this will depend on John's project update, but most likely it's looking like the time we're going out to bid and the time where we have left to begin construction in FY 26-27, that this is going to be a multi-year project in terms of incurring expenses. So that $3 or $4 million, whatever we thought authorized, is actually going to get diluted or spread out even further.
Yeah. Okay. And so just to sense check here in my back of the envelope, it's $1.6 million is what we bonded for the Kennedy School project last year. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
1.6 million. And so let's say in worst case, meaning the entirety of it is drawn July 1st. So we're paying interest on it the entire year. If it's a 5% interest rate, I'm just making it up. I don't know what the municipal borrowing rate is. I know we're triple rated, so maybe it's different. I don't know. If it's 5%, that's an $80,000 impact on this budget. So that's 80,000 out of the 1.5 million for open space and recreation that's tied up. Whether that's a lot or a little to you is open to your interpretation, I guess. But just wanted to flag that's when we're talking about covering off the risk of debt service hitting on that line item. that is probably ballpark. Alan, Roberta, or anybody else, flag me if I'm totally off base with my wild math, but I think it's something around 80,000, 100,000. Okay.
I don't happen to recall.
I think that's a little, well, you had put together like a debt service sheet and I was looking for it on that financial spreadsheet and I don't see it. So it might have been another spreadsheet. But we had talked about it 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, so it was in the meeting packet, probably in March. Um,
So in that one,
Debt service calculations. I'm gonna pull those up.
We also, if I could offer another way to look at it is, you're correct, Ryan. Actually, our market rates are pretty much because of our AAA and our municipal tax exempt standing, pretty much as low as you can go in the bond world. So I actually think they were hovering around, actually still close to three-ish, after the tax exempt sort of discount and the AAA discount. But with that being said, your other frame of reference is, the debt we have outstanding, say for the historic reserve or the housing, versus what we're borrowing now. So, I think what did we do for West Branch Library? Was it like 10 million, 8 million, or I forget what it was. But you can kind of make a relative reference that way too.
Gotcha. Okay, so I see here. So I wasn't considering the principal repayment. I guess I was just looking at the interest. That would be the 80,000. But if you scroll back down, Roberta, I saw.
So this is in total. Oh, annual debt service payment.
Yeah. So the
Yeah,
140.
so the proposed is 140,000 to answer David's question from earlier.
And that is a worst case scenario, meaning all $1.6 million are drawn on July the 1st, meaning it's outstanding for the full year. In practice, per what Alan just said, it'll be less than that because it'll get drawn over time.
May I quell some nerves here and provide a little bit of a timeline and the estimate and whatnot?
Please, John.
Okay, so we accepted a bid for $1.7 million. This is for the first phase of the project. So we have $1.3 million available, and so that will be about $400,000 that we will need to at some point bond for. But the contractors are going to be on the hook for maintenance responsibilities for a year, warranties and replacements. So there's a lot of elements that we won't directly pay for until they've survived for a year. So honestly, looking at that, around $400,000 might be the cost that kind of remains for all of those kind of maintenance and liability items. So we might potentially not have to withdraw any of that yet. Then phase two goes out to bid this winter. And so we technically won't have to bond any of that until they start billing us. And they won't start billing us until they're in the heat of summer of next year. So that'll be probably around July that we'll start to receive bills on that second phase, which will be the remainder of the funds.
Helpful. Thanks, John.
Of course.
But for bookkeeping, for like kind of allocating, in the future, what do we need to set aside to service these debts? Is it, kind of what John is predicting we're going to do, or is it what, the worst case of what we've authorized?
Maybe the worst case is best case.
That's a very good question because in the past, before I came to the city of Somerville, I would, as you were describing earlier, take the estimated debt service and just hold that every year in the same way that we have been holding the Adams Magoon house in case it moves forward. Just holding it in reserve without spending those funds. And we could continue to hold in reserve the the debt service amount for the for this. And I would reflect that in the fall report rather than this budget. because I've been instructed in preparing this budget that we're looking at this year, or this evening, that I'm given the debt service, the actual debt service that will be paid at the beginning of the year by our finance department. So that's what appears in that debt service column in the budget. And so if it's, um, I think if we were to just hold it in the back of our minds and not spend it, but keep it reserved until it's called upon, then we'll be doubly safe. It If it's unexpectedly called on, then we'll have the funds available. But I would recall that it was using a projected debt service amount that was the reason why we recently had to make a $4,000 correction to the to the historic preservation reserve at our meeting last month. So it's not a fail safe, but 4,000 is definitely better than 140,000 to be short at the end of the year.
Yeah. Rona?
Yeah, just a procedural question because I'm still new here. If we have 140,000 set aside and we come to having all our presentations and we want to spend some of that, which we now know isn't going to be needed, is there a procedural way for us to move that money?
Holding the money in reserve doesn't require that the money be moved. It is just whether we consider the money available to spend or not, it's still sitting in the same account.
Okay, so we don't have to do anything special if we see we're not going to need it.
No, I prepare before the committee makes its funding decisions. I prepare a report that describes exactly how much funding is available in each of the accounts. And so I will take into consideration if we're holding money in reserve for a specific purpose like this, and then tell you how much is actually available to spend after subtracting the funds that we're sitting on for one reason or another.
I'm sorry, Rona, you go on.
I was just saying thanks for the answer. You go.
Now, before I thought you might have said that the city tells you like on July 1 what the debt service obligations for that year will be, right? That'll be, so July 1, 2027 will, or July 1, 2026 we'll know what the debt service will be for FY 27 fiscal year.
I will be perfectly honest that I don't deal with the bonding projects very often, and so what we're trying to get a clear answer to is an area that I don't have a lot of experience with. Alan, maybe you can be more articulate.
Yeah, this is really getting a little bit in the weeds of city cash flow management, but I'll try to do my best to boil it down to something that's relevant to CPA.
So Alan, before you go too far, because I know this is very weedy, what I'm really just trying to establish is, would we know what the debt service on would be before we're making our funding allocations in like October, November, whenever it is we're doing it? That's really what I'm trying to figure out.
We should have down to, like Roberta was saying, I think in one year we were $4,000 off. We should have down to a very minimal rounding error the exact amount, because what we're doing in the budget is, bonding in the public markets is expensive. So the way we kind of manage the expense of like issuing public securities or public debt is you try to go out to market as less often as possible and in as big a package as possible. So we really only try to go out once or twice a year and float as much as we can through cash throughout the course of the year. Typically, historically, I've always seen us go out around the like May-ish, close to June timeframe when we have a pretty solid estimate of what we're going to need for the rest of the fiscal year. And that's why the timing of construction and whatnot is so important. So really what we're paying for in this year is the debt incurred last year. That's why you don't see Kennedy in this year's debt projection, because Kennedy did not incur any expenses in FY26. So to that extent, barring a very small rounding error, you will know what you're going to pay in that year. You're just paying for the prior year's cash activities. I hope that made sense because I feel like I was sounding confusing.
Yeah, no, I get that. So in May or June, you're making the decision for what was in the fiscal year just ending.
Yep. And we're trying to go out to market in one big, huge
Yeah.
bunch to not incur a bunch of transaction costs, essentially, is what we're doing.
So, like, just to dumb it down question, we authorized $1.6 million, and there was an estimate what that was going to cost us interest wise. What you're saying is that in actual practice, that's not going to be one bond, it's going to be a bunch of bonds that'll happen over the course of the project, which will be a couple years. And so the interest rate that we projected that Roberta gave us is sort of like based on the percentages at that time that we were expecting. Because
It'll be multi-tiered. It'll be one rate. It was whatever our rate is now in May 2026. It'll be a slightly different rate in May 2027. Yeah, absolutely.
And if just for simplicity, we just sort of say kind of what Roberta was saying is like basically treat ourselves as a bank and say, we're going to dole out $160,000 a year, regardless of how much is actually drawn out. And if you don't need it yet, then it's there. And at the end of the day, we've allocated X amount over 20 years. And that's that. And we don't really get so fussy with how much you're actually like what we allocated is going to be there whether or not you need it. Does that make sense?
Like a line of credit.
Line of credit, yeah.
Yes.
So we don't have to come back next year and say you only needed 23,000 because you only did the general conditions or whatever.
Right. But what I'm thinking though is that, well, I agree with that conservative approach. Whatever we lock up for that purpose, we can't allocate to another project in the meantime.
So if we were to go down that route and effectively lock up, let's just say the worst case, like Roberta was saying, is how we historically have modeled these. Would that make anybody more inclined to change the allocation to parks and open space or any other? A 1% change is $80,000 roughly, 5%, 400,000. So, I think moving a percent here or there is not a major change to the way that we conduct business. But if the concern was, trying to level the playing field versus last year with money that is freely available to hear new projects coming in the door, then we could effectively cover off this risk that we're discussing on open space recreation specifically with 2%, right? 160,000 in budget to cover off 140,000 in risk. Does that make sense?
It does, but like you say, it's a little bit like, I understand that we're doing it in this order because it makes sense to, figure out our allocation, and then we're going to look at the projects that come in. It's a little bit, kind of cart before the horse, because until you are considering, the projects.
Totally right. Totally right. So maybe there's no action needed at all, and we can cover off any of this, fluctuation just from the budgeted reserve. Maybe by leaving this flexible on our, 45% that remains in our purview, maybe 45% less 4% for admin, so 41%. But the flexibility that we have, maybe that's enough to handle any fluctuation based on the projects that come in the door and how much debt service actually hits us over the course of the year. I mean, does anybody feel differently? Maybe we don't need to, maybe we're set up for success already.
I see Rona has a hand raised.
Yeah, the way I'm thinking about this, if we leave this at the allocations that we have now, if we sort of agree in principle that if there's more money left over because we're not using the worst case scenario, that priority goes to putting that back in open space. And just have that sort of as a guideline rather than a written commitment.
I mean, is that something we could state, Roberta, as a preference or a guiding? Not, I
That
don't want to say
actually
rule, but go ahead.
that actually raises for me a consideration which I had not thought of until this moment, even though it's actually kind of obvious, which is that unlike in previous years, when the eligibility determination forms were submitted in July, we actually have already received eligibility determination forms before you determine this allocation. So you could take that into consideration if you wanted. On the grant tracking detail page, I have recorded everything that has been received so far, or that's been received at all for this year, of requests. And so if you wanted, you could take into consideration what's on the table for um, for requests for historic preservation and open space and recreation. Just out of curiosity, let me do a quick sum. Actually, I'm gonna do the sum in this column so it doesn't mess up the sum below. And then I'm going to put a percentage here. No, it won't work in that column. I'll have to put it in this big column. Okay. Sorry. There we go. I'm not sure why the housing.
You grabbed a different denominator for row 20 there.
I did, and I did that, so I'm not sure what so this is how much was actually asked for,
Mm-hmm.
and this is, oh, you're right, I shouldn't have used that denominator. FY20. So that was the total. So this is not really a reasonable number because this is the 55% of the funds that are actually available. And so open space and recreation is definitely seeking more this year than historic preservation. But given that we have approximately 8 million available altogether and $12 million requested, of course, we anticipate that some of that is likely to be bonding for Art Farm. That yeah, I'm not sure how this calculation helps you, but
I mean, it's basically just expressing that the demand this year for parks and open space is about 4-1 for against the historic, right? And I know Art
yeah,
Farm kind of blows this open. Um, so, and if a portion of that is bonded, then the non-bonded amount is not going to be, quite as dramatic a difference. But it does, drive home that it's several orders of magnitude more um, for the parks and open space.
yeah.
Ryan, and if I could
add to my earlier comment about the debt service factoring in my analysis, I do really appreciate the conversation everyone just had around being able to absorb, surprise debt service coming in. But I also want to just emphasize that I think I would have allocated or suggested that we allocate things differently, knowing that debt service ask was going to come in. Meaning, I think I would have tweaked or advocated for a little bit more open space to help us better manage the debt request, which we ended up kind of help supporting on the back end anyways, right, with the vote we just took a couple months ago. But I think what I meant to say is that's one thing I would think about here, right? If Ant Farm's coming in with a $4 million bond request, I might want to think about shifting the percentage a little bit in favor of open space to preempt that request to make that a little bit easier to manage. Just again, thinking of as one person. That was a learning that I want to make sure I articulated here, and just in case that wasn't clear in my earlier comments, I want to reiterate that. So to that end, I would again advocate for a little bit of a shift towards more open space dollars.
And sorry if I missed. Did you say where would you advocate for moving that from if you were gonna vote on it?
Oh, you mean we can't just create money out of nowhere? I mean, honestly, maybe I tried to shave like a percent from historic preservation, although I think that one is already kind of as low as I probably would want to take that. I think the obvious choice would be to consider pulling a little bit from the affordable housing pool.
Yeah, understood. Okay, thanks for stating that. John, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just kind of want to echo some of the things Michael was saying. Just with the increasing density in Somerville and the increasing demand for these like multi-layered parks that really service the needs of like multiple types of people, multiple uses in that space, it's definitely becoming more expensive. And also with federal funds kind of diminishing a little bit and city budgets becoming a little bit tighter right now. CPA funds definitely helps and supports our open spaces tremendously. So that's why this year you're starting to see a larger request. And I know the CPA can always reduce asks, they can't increase them. So we kind of come in with these kind of high requests this year, kind of really showing the need for all of our open space throughout the city.
Thanks, John.
I have a thought that maybe it would make more sense to just take that out of the affordable housing and move it to the undesignated. In a way, it's sort of a shell game anyway, but because if you want to be a little bit of a devil's advocate, adjusting our priority percentages as a reaction to what's before us in a given year isn't really reflecting the intent of those percentages originally. The 13, 18, and 54, et cetera, whatever we just did, are supposed to be a reflection of our priorities in general.
That's a great point.
So having a larger fund that's undesignated that we could plunk into open space, because at the moment they need a lot of that. It sort of, to me, it helps massage that in the right direction that makes more sense.
Thanks, Eric.
It's ultimately saying the same thing, but that's just kind of how it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Sorry, Michael, did you want to chime in?
I was just saying that's smart. I like the idea, and I appreciate, Eric, that you're saying that this should be a beacon, not a reaction. So thank you for saying that.
For sure.
Okay, so maybe as we try to round this towards some some decisions. Is anybody against or want to speak against the idea of moving some amount, we'll come to the amount in a second, but some amount out of community housing reserve and into budgeted reserve, meaning back within the immediate purview of this group and used to cover whatever projects come in the door, whether they are an increased number of open space and recreation projects or big ticket items coming in one category or another. Is anybody against that concept of moving something from community housing reserve into budgeted reserve for that flexibility?
I just have a confirmation question. Could
Sure.
we ever give that money back to housing?
I would definitely expect so because I believe we've made incremental awards to them in the past when we've had funds available. Roberta, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, what we've typically done in the past is when we calculate that fall report and we see the amount of funding available, we look at the unanticipated revenue from the previous year and give them a share of that unanticipated revenue. We've done that based on the percentage that was promised in the year that that the unanticipated revenue was for, but that all of these are decisions that are at your discretion. So you could choose to give them more than the amount that was promised. You could choose not to give them the second allocation if you chose. Um, it's all your decision.
John Frasman. Okay, so I don't think I'm hearing any stated opposition to this in concept. Okay, so if we were to pursue that, the right number, again, reiterating that 1% is $80,000. Does anybody want to make a first suggestion of how much we'd be making this move on?
So the budget reserve right now is the 920.
That reflects a would-be 11%. It's calculating off of what Roberta throws in there.
Yeah. So I just threw numbers in there based on the conversation that you were having, but this is the
Okay,
starting point. Yeah.
So it's and so that would be the budget reserve for the next fiscal year, not what's in there already, because we're carrying forward, or did we allocate it all?
The budgeted reserve is what we allocate this year. Undesignated fund balance is what we find left over in the bank account when everything that gets carried over from year to year.
And that's not included anywhere in here. We actually have $750,000 or something of dry powder outside of this budget.
So I guess, is that where we want to put this additional? Is that more flexible than the budget reserve? Like, what's the difference between what's in the budget reserve and what's in that other?
Budgeted reserve is what you can spend on July 1. The undesignated fund balance, you have to wait until it is most of it, you have to wait until the budget is certified by the state after the end of the fiscal year.
Oh, okay.
So said another way, if we put 100% of it into the budgeted reserve, we could be reactionary with the funding allocation. Is that right? It's basically wildcard money.
So the minimum that can be in each of the program area categories is 10%. So the maximum that the budgeted reserve could be would be 70% with no admin, but with admin 65%.
Right, but I don't think that's what we're talking about, right?
So I just go out on a limb. Oh, go ahead, Rona.
Yeah, I wasn't part of the bringing it up to 5%, but I would propose to the additional 5% to housing. And I would propose to have that and put 2.5% into the budgeted reserve. But
Okay.
it sort of depends on how strongly people felt about the 5%.
Yeah,
Less.
understood. Thanks for putting a stake in the ground on that. So if we did if we did 52.5%, Roberta, if you want to throw that in there, let's see what the move across would be. Should be about 200,000.
Nope, that didn't work. Okay. Trying to do some fancy math here.
Yeah, it was $60 million.
I tried. I don't know why this
No,
just did that.
that would solve all of our problems.
Okay, so let me try this again. 52.5%. Now it gets it.
So we went from about 840,000 to 1.04 million, so 200,000.
Yeah.
So a $200,000 shift. That feels reasonable to me. Anybody want to advocate for more or less on a shift?
I like this approach categorically. I think this is a good thing for us to do. I don't think it's going to address our budget shortfall in open space and recreation, in this year. Without bonds that are gonna, in my mind, tie up a far higher percentage of the open space budget than I'm going to be comfortable with.
So would you want to make this a bigger
No,
swap?
I mean, I don't think we can solve that problem with this mechanism. Like I say, I think this is a good thing for us to do irrespective of that.
Okay.
I just don't think it solves the problem that we kind of backed us into, talking about this.
Fair enough. Okay.
Do you have a crystal ball, John, to know what other debt stuff open space might be hitting us up in the next, 20 years or so?
I wish. Our open space and recreation plan definitely helps to highlight that, but these are kind of our two main big projects, at least for the next 5 or so years. I don't really know what's big down the pipeline. I know there's a big push for a dog park. We'll try and figure out locations for that, but for big projects, these are kind of our two main ones right now. Trump was highlighted as a priority, but we are waiting kind of on the Sycamore Street decision before moving forward on any work there.
But it certainly could move forward in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? When we would still have the debt service on these two other projects. I mean, that's the problem. For me, this is the problem with the debt service.
Yeah.
We're paying it for 15 or 20 years.
No, yeah. And that's the joke Eric's making is I don't really know.
Right.
I can give a sense to kind of the near future. And like I was saying before, we don't know if there's going to be a big pot of ARPA funds or other interesting federal grants or state grants or kind of mass game and other funds that really help and support us on our open spaces.
It's been my observation that the open space portion of what we do is a little bit more manic in the way requests come to us, and that because your projects are generally very expensive, historic stuff has always been a little over also, but it's some sort of a more constant, slightly over. This year it's got a little bit more, but so it's maybe easier to do debt service when we could certainly face some lean years ahead when we just don't have any new projects, because it's not like private citizens are coming to us with open space projects.
Right. I will say, I think a lot of our future projects are going to be kind of these smaller, pick a task at a bunch of parks and kind of achieve it. So port in place or adding a suite of benches or drinking fountains like we kind of did at Nunziato, but kind of doing that at broader scales. So those will be more affordable, cheaper projects that we can kind of get one contractor to do a lot of little projects throughout the city.
Okay.
I Just wanted to share. I meant to show this to you all earlier when we were going through the plan. This is also in the appendix of the plan. I took keywords out of each of the responses that people gave us so that it would actually make sense in a word cloud. And so maybe this could give an idea about what kinds of projects are on people's minds. And John mentioned dog park. That really is one of the ones that jumps out, as well as art farm is the big one. So this is kind of a little bit in relation to the degree of importance that these things have. And there are some specific locations also that are maybe underserved or need some improvement that could potentially be open space projects as well.
All right, so back to our numbers. We have this $2.5 million move. Anybody that would not vote for that, given that it doesn't sound like there's advocates for more or less than that. Okay, well maybe that's our number then.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that we should stress as we're messaging this, if anyone notices, is how much more they're still getting because of the, the 1.5% jump.
Yep.
Than when they were getting 50%.
And I think that's easily quantifiable. I think that should shine through in the plan.
Because otherwise it looks like we're not. Like we started the conversation, the affordability is certainly everyone's highest priority.
Yep.
But we can fall back on the fact that the surveys were a little bit more conservative than that with that. They would have us sit down at 48% or something and higher number in open space.
Right. I'm just thinking when we do this, we'll have to think about messaging.
Yeah.
Yep. No, that's fair. And for what it's worth, this money that is moving into a budget reserve, it could still end up going to affordable housing, right? Yeah. It could still end up going to any of these categories.
That's true. We're just giving ourselves flexibility.
That's right.
So hypothetically, one could keep everything at 10% and just have a massive open-ended fund every year and just decide year by year what they want to do.
I think we brought that up at one point a couple of years ago, and I don't know. I think the feeling was that it ran counter to the stated goals, and that this is a good way to indicate to folks how our priorities relate to the goals of the community. But I hear you, and I agree there are advantages to that approach. Okay. Anything else, Roberta, we should be considering on this before we maybe move towards a motion?
I think you've got it all. You guys have covered everything.
Okay.
3 or 4 times.
Easy. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I would love to invite a motion, if anybody would like to make it, to adopt the new funding allocations for.
I think Rona kind of made a motion
for the year fiscal. Yeah. I mean,
we can give it to Rona if she wants it.
Well, I made a suggestion. Okay, it's now a motion.
All right.
I move to move 2.5% into the budgeted reserve for flexibility in the next fiscal year budget.
I'll second Rona's suggestion.
Thanks, Eric. Okay.
All right, I will call the roll. I just need to find my list of all of you. David Turin.
Yes.
Michael McNally.
Aye.
Rona Fishman.
Yes.
Joe Capuano.
Yes.
John Bronnenkamp.
Yes.
Carlos Ayala.
Yes.
Eric Parks.
Yes.
And Ryan Kirchhoff.
Yes. All right.
Great.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the dialogue. Thanks, Rona, for putting your flag out. And this will be a great starting point.
Great.
All right.
So I wanted to give a quick overview. I'm sorry, I'm I'm talking over you. You go ahead, Ryan.
No, go. All good.
I wanted to give a quick overview of the projects for which we have received eligibility determination forms. This month, I was also going to mention screening forms, but I didn't happen to bring that list with me, and it's not public anyway, so I will skip that for now. But eligibility determination forms. The church, the former church, former Masonic building on Highland Ave that is in very deteriorated condition is under ownership of a new owner who plans to undertake an adaptive reuse project, preserving the historic church building and probably developing some type of housing in the rear of it. I don't know if that would have an affordability component beyond the inclusionary zoning or if it's going to be straightforward. But they're looking for funding that will be for the design, mainly used for design and engineering for the historic preservation portion. Large ask of $750,000. Right across the street from that, Mission Church of Christ is the gray stone church that's directly across the street from that building. They were a previous grant recipient. They previously had a roof repaired or replaced, and they're coming back this year asking for a condition assessment on their building. $25,000, similar to what we did a couple of years ago for Vida Real. The city of Somerville, staying on Highland Avenue, is looking for a condition assessment for the armory. And then the Elizabeth Peabody House is coming back with a request for restoration, repair to the clock tower. City of Somerville also asking for $70,000 for the Broadway, 165 Broadway building, which has teen empowerment and Project Soup in the building. And I'd like to come back and talk about this project a little bit because I would be interested in getting your opinion before I return their response to the eligibility determination form. Somerville Museum is looking for more restoration of their building and collections. I have a little bit of concern about whether some of what they're asking for might be in the category of maintenance rather than actually restoration. And I'd like to suggest that they carry out a condition assessment as well, because although they've done the big things, the basement restoration and the elevator installation, and before that the roof, they maybe could benefit from a condition assessment that looks at the masonry and the windows and anything around the building that needs to be restored. And also 396, 398 Broadway, which is a residential condominium building, wood frame building that's in a local historic district. And they also have a list of projects, some of which seem like they would be potential CPA appropriate, and some of them seem as though they would be somewhat in the maintenance category. So, and coming back to the 165 Broadway fire escape, it's a historic building. It would need to have a determination of historic um, eligibility by HPC because it doesn't currently have any listing of its being historic. But it is an old fire building owned by the city. But they're only asking for the repair of the fire escape and no other historic parts of the building. So I wanted to see how the committee feels about these three projects, which would be maybe some combination of maintenance or historic preservation. And would you want to have discretion over deciding what's maintenance or historic preservation? Or is that something that you'd like to have a staff decision? You have copies of the eligibility determination forms, and what I can do if you prefer is to encourage them to apply, but to discern for themselves whether to leave some of the things that they're asking for out, or to let them know that the committee may not determine that all of the items in their scope are going to be eligible.
How have you, that's a super vague distinction there between
Yeah.
maintenance and restoration. All restoration is maintenance in a way, but how have you done it in the past with projects?
So you're right. It's a really sticky, a blurry distinction, and it has caused us trouble in the past. So this is why I want to think about it carefully, how to approach it. So for example, we had received previously a request for masonry repair on a condominium building, and it was suggested to me. And I think I'm not sure I used that suggestion um, as like I'm reflecting on it and understanding it better now than I did then. That the um, who is benefiting, especially with a residential building, who is benefiting from the repair? If it's repointing, then the beneficiary is the tenant who is not experiencing water infiltration into their residential space, or the building owner. But if it's window replacement, everybody can see their windows. You can't, when a person is walking by on the street, what do they notice? They notice the architectural details. They notice what style of windows the building has. They don't necessarily notice whether there's rot in the clapboard, or the mortar is intact or has cracks in it, right? So another tough distinction is painting, because if you, like, for example, a few years ago, we gave a grant to a nonprofit organization that owned a residential house on Broadway for restoration, and we paid for their windows and for restoring some of the trim on their building. But they actually used tapped funding from a different source to paint their building after we paid for the trim replacement, because the CPC at the time made a distinction, or the staff. I'm not sure if it was the committee or the staff, because the decision was made before my time. Um, Made a distinction that paint was maintenance, but replacing elements was repair. But if you don't paint the elements that you've replaced, you haven't completed the project. So it's a very sticky decision to make, and I'd really like to invite all of you to provide some input about how and when you'd like to make that decision, because the farther they get into the application process, the harder it is to say no. And maybe it's a discussion that you want to have before you invite them to apply. Or maybe you want to tell them to go ahead, but you want to reserve the ability to really think about what parts of the project CPA funding should go toward.
Yeah, I think it's something that is worth some consideration. It's probably not going to get hashed out tonight, right here and now,
Yeah.
but it's really interesting. Paint is clearly maintenance because it's a routine, something you have to do periodically. If you
But
don't do it,
if it's part of a larger project, then like if
yeah,
the only thing you're doing is painting, then it's maintenance. But if you're
Right,
replacing elements of the building, then you need to paint them, and you need to
right,
paint the
right.
whole building. You can't just replace paint the one element you replaced.
That initial paint job that they on the fresh wood. Yeah, right. So there's that subject, and then you also were talking about the fire escape,
The
and I know
fire
you.
escape, yeah, that's also a difficult one because is it maintenance to repair a fire escape on a historic building when you are not making any other historic, like preserving the historic features of the building in any way?
Isn't it, is the fire escape being restored in a historical way? I mean, or is it just a flashed on modern fire escape?
That's a good question. I see a hand from Rona.
Yeah. When I've been pondering that fire escape one. And we do elevators in order to make something safe and accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And I could make an argument that a fire escape does the same thing. So I'm making that argument.
Okay.
I agree with that. If there were no fire escape and they needed the fire escape to safely use those to conform with code, I'd say absolutely, just like an elevator. So um, they could wait till it falls off and then we pay for a new one. I'm being a little silly, but yeah.
So this is an illustration of,
Oh, oh, that's beautiful.
yeah.
I just said, oh, it's ugly. Yes.
Yeah,
They
like
can paint it in historic color.
the so my inclination was to tell them that structural or code improvement only without any commitment to historic preservation isn't historic preservation, but it's I don't know exactly what should be my call or someone else's call. So I want to give you the give you a chance to weigh in on this.
Do you know offhand what specifically they want to do? Is this replacing rusty things and giving it a good paint job? I guess that's a
Um,
huge thing.
yeah, this I have not.
Oh, it's buried in
Yeah,
there. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. The other question I have is you ask about what other funding they could tap, not us. And this just feels like something the city should do. And not necessarily through us. And I don't know if there's a reason to push back on that.
So I can say a reason why the city doesn't just do this is because this building is literally on the bottom of the priority list, behind the schools and City Hall and Franny Road, like all of the buildings that are being used by the city for essential core city services need improvement. And this building, the city is being used by a couple of nonprofit organizations. And the city has not really supported any capital improvements to this building ever. Um, and because it just is never at the top of the priority list for capital improvements.
But is it our job to
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. No,
That's
yeah, I
pay for the
agree.
stragglers?
That-
That
yeah,
really
that's not a compelling reason for us to fund it. I
it
hate to
rubs
say
me the wrong way because technically a fire escape is a means of egress. It's an egress route.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as having your hallway with a floor that's falling in or something. It looks superficial, but it's an integral part of the system. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Right. I mean,
but
presumably
obviously
it
you're
would
just
fail. It would presumably fail some occupancy inspection.
Mhm.
If they
Yeah.
didn't, if the city didn't repair it.
I mean, quite literally a couple of years ago, a very similar situation was 90 Union Square, the former fire station
Oh, yeah.
in Union Square, that we had to displace the nonprofit organizations that were using that building because it became structurally unsound. This building is probably the next one that's going to happen to, because of situations like they're trying to use CPA as a band-aid to avoid displacing the organizations without actually making a commitment to historic preservation. But I shouldn't sway you too far with my own opinions because their minds could be changed. They might be persuaded to make a commitment to historic preservation. I don't know.
Yeah, Roberta, I just want to echo kind of what you're saying. Like, at least with the roof, when we gave funding, it was to some historic elements along the roof, and it was preserving the character of the roof of City Hall. This just kind of feels like we need to fix this.
Yeah.
CPA can fund it.
Yeah, I feel like it's we're the city's slush fund.
But at the same time, it is a building, and like being able to access that site and access the historic elements of it is one angle. But also maybe there's an angle where we could see them do additional improvements that address some of the historic preservation of the building.
Yeah, it could be a foot in the door.
Which what building is this again? I'm not really sure.
It's
165 Broadway, if you want to Google that. I don't happen to
Yeah.
have that screen
Okay.
up right now.
Yeah,
it's right next to what's it, Chicky Harris?
Yeah, it's that little. It's west, a little bit across street that crosses Broadway.
okay, yeah.
It's
That's
a cool
the part.
building. If you not to digress, but there are some pictures that used to have this massive steeple on it, like a tower that went way came off. Who knows, a hurricane or a fire or something. But there's some cool old pictures of it.
So I don't know if you want to, if you agree with the feedback that I want to. So the feedback that I was going to give the city about the fire station was that the title of their EDF says condition assessment and fire escape, but then they didn't even ask for as much money as the quote for the fire escape is. So that sounds as though condition assessment was not one of the things that they planned to actually undertake. So my feedback to them was going to be that this would be a good project paired with a condition assessment, but wouldn't be eligible without some type of historic preservation element to the project. But tell me if you would react differently.
I think that's a good way to
Well,
parse it.
It seems like logical pushback to me.
Yeah.
Okay. So this has been really helpful. Maybe I can take a moment to share the next eligibility determination form with you that I had a question mark on, which is this is a 396, 398 Broadway, and I have queued up at the top of the screen their description of what they want to do. They want to refinish, repair, reseal, and repaint the wooden clapboard siding, trim corner boards and water table boards, and replace any lead paint covered elements with new material matching in profile and color, to remove, restore, reglaze, reinstall, and reseal 41 wooden windows, to remove lead paint covered window trim and sills, and to replace them with new trim and sills to match, to repair, reseal, and repaint roofline carpentry, to replace missing decorative details on the facade where necessary, and to repair and reseal the aluminum siding and paint it to match the clapboard. So my initial reaction to this is that what sounds to me like it's really has a public benefit is the windows and replacing missing trim, missing decorative details. And maybe the window sills is part of replacing the windows. And aside from that, I would consider this to be maintenance without really a clear public benefit.
What did we do on the Pleasant Street place just last year? Granted, it wasn't a private owner, it was a nonprofit.
It was a nonprofit
But-
organization, and they did similar work to what's described here.
That's what I'm thinking. So I'm just wondering what our
Yeah.
precedent is that way.
Yeah, I think part of it is because that was a nonprofit organization that's creating all affordable units. We were more lenient. So it's a real good question is what is and I think it's good for the committee to be able to state reasons for treating one project differently from another, and I can make sure that the plan and the application materials provide that distinction so that people know what they can apply for.
Yeah,
To me,
we really
it
need
sounds
some good guidelines.
How
Sorry,
special
go
is
ahead.
this building? Eric, do you know?
Um, I I don't have it in front of me, but let me. My memory is that it's a nice building on Broadway, and Broadway is rapidly getting picked apart. Um, let's see.
Let me see if they did not give supplemental material.
190. What was that?
396.
396, 398.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it sounds like it's worth deliberating. I mean, obviously, the applicant should know that there's risk in the project not being funded, but it sounds like we have approved similar projects with different ownership conditions in the past, so it's worth having a discussion about it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I agree.
the Magoon House is very special. And it's in private ownership. And how far do we want to expand?
I agree, and I'm not suggesting that we should be approving it or anything like that, right? I'm just suggesting that it's worth having the full debate as opposed to a quick go no go right now.
Okay. I am seeking opinions, particularly from the coalition on this. I think they could provide some valuable input as to what might be. And so maybe I can provide the committee with the response that I have to these three projects I also asked them about. Um, so that when you deliberate, you can have their response to these projects. So when you have your deliberation in September, you can consider eligibility as one of the questions. Like, is this really an eligible um, activity to fund with CPA? And you can also consider, is this a priority? Is there a public benefit here? Um, is a really important question. Like, what is the public benefit of replacing lead paint on their building? Um,
Well, clearly there's a public benefit. I'm just not sure it's our responsibility.
yeah, that too. Yeah.
It's not as if they're going to knock down the building because it needs to be painted.
No, but like you could also argue that if you look at the street view pictures, it is peeling off, right? And that lead paint is going into the street. So even just from like a public health perspective, there's value here, right?
Okay.
Again, I'm actually on average not supportive of funding a lot of private stuff, but like again, I just think it's worth having the dialogue for sure.
Okay. The one more that I'm going to pull up is the Somerville Museum. Um, and okay, I have the place where they describe the project. So what they're looking for are to repoint the lower third of the exterior of the building and repair areas of water damage. Investigate the museum's 1930s sewer system to understand and formulate corrective measures. Continue their archive preservation project and have 3 paintings preserved, and to preserve the Loring Library doors. including the leaded glass transom. So my sense is that my feeling and my gut reaction might be different from yours, and there's room for discretion here. So I'd like to hear your reaction to this as well. But investigating the sewer system to see if what repairs it might need it's inspired by the Buddy's Diner project where we're repairing a crushed sewer system. But I feel as though this is an area of maintenance where the organization might be able to investigate and make repairs. It's not preventing the organization from being able to operate out of its building. So that was my feeling about this, and my preference would be to have the exterior of the building repointing and repairing to have a condition assessment prioritize the needs for that rather than just doing it piecemeal. But I'd like to see what you all would suggest.
I actually agree with your approach on that. I think just saying a blanket, we need to repoint. I'd like to know how bad, does it really need to happen right away, or is it just how widespread is it? Is there lintel work? Is there other masonry restoration that's needed? And also with them checking the sewer, right? Because if I have a historic house here, if I just came and said, "Hey, I'd like to have someone run a scope down my sewer," I wouldn't even think of asking the CPC for money to do that, not knowing if there's a problem. Buddy's was sort of a catastrophic event. It was keeping them from operating the business. Consequences are huge. That's my thought.
Right. I appreciate your thinking these through with me. Again, maybe it's worth deliberating and having that discussion if they do want to include those things on the application, but I want to make sure that the committee is empowered to say no if you don't feel comfortable with everything that they've included in their application.
It also helps them in a way because we're like open space. We're going to be stretched pretty thin this year too, in the historic preservation part of it.
Yeah.
And without any kind of benchmark to know how badly off they are, it makes it hard for us to know whether we should give money to that cause or not.
True. And I did just want to go over a couple more. So those were all of the historic preservation projects we've talked about. The eligibility determination forms also cover some open space and recreation projects. Namely, we've talked about the Kennedy Schoolyard, which may need some additional funding. Maybe we didn't talk about this, but they're contemplating whether they may need some additional funding to complete the work. So just putting in a application this year so that they can be considered in the regular funding round if those funds are needed.
So that confuses me though, because in our earlier conversation, John, you made it sound like you probably don't need to tap the whole 1.6 million we've allocated for bonding.
For phase,
How would this factor into that?
this would be for phase 2 of the project because bids came in a little bit higher than we expected, with it being all asphalt, and us currently at war and the cost of petroleum escalating.
Is the bond restricted for only phase 1, or can the bond be reallocated to phase 2 if you don't need it all?
The bond covers both phase 1 and phase 2.
So you think that you're going to need an entire additional $1 million beyond what we gave you guys in cash? I think what, 2 million and then the 1.6 million. So
We-
another $1 million.
We potentially may. the CPA can always wind down our requests. So we went with the higher
Okay.
sum as we kind of determine these costs right now and kind of work with our designers. When we come with our full application, we'll have more information on kind of our more realistic
So when
request
you were saying earlier that you didn't think you need the whole 1.6, that was only for phase one?
for just phase one. Yes.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Can you
We'll
just
have plenty of time to understand
Yeah.
it later. So
Yeah,
at the
no, but I
moment, I
did
just
see
want
this, and it did have
yeah,
my head, me scratching my head.
yeah. And we did talk about Art Farm earlier. A $5 million ask is anticipated to be split between bond and some amount of our current revenue to be determined. And PSEF is also requesting a small $30,000 grant to complete an unfinished piece of the West Somerville Neighborhood School playground project. And finally, we have a project that was initiated by residents, and they've partnered with the city, with the engineering department specifically, to expand open space by converting some road area around Spring Street Triangle to expand the triangle to be a community pocket park. So they're requesting $700,000 for design and engineering. And that's all of the requests that we have in the pipeline for this year. I don't have any concerns or questions about eligibility for any of the open space projects. They're always very cut and dried. Just by virtue of being park improvements, they're eligible. The real question marks come with historic preservation. So,
Okay. Thanks for taking us through those.
Yep. And that's all that I have for discussion, but I did have a couple of things that I wanted to bring up um, on the upcoming schedule.
Go ahead.
Which is, I think I put in the meeting packet. Sorry, I've got to navigate back to the meeting packet. I don't have my notes. Under CPC planning, there are 2 flyers announcements for upcoming ribbon cuttings. Quincy Open Space ribbon cutting is taking place on Tuesday, June 9th, 2 to 3 p.m. And right around the corner, Nunziata Water Fountains has a ribbon cutting that is taking place. Sorry, I can't read it without opening it. On Tuesday, June 2 at Nunziata Field. And the city would like you to know that there will be the Somerville police dogs to celebrate the opening of the water fountains. So you would all be invited and welcome to join us to
Well,
celebrate
I'm
the
sorry.
complete
What were those dates again? I'm sorry.
Tuesday, June 2 and Tuesday, June 9.
Okay.
I have a note
June,
to add to that list.
you have more to add?
Sorry, I just got confirmation like an hour and a half ago, but we'll be having the groundbreaking for the Kennedy School project on June 15th, which is Monday at 3:30, kind of after dismissal when all the kids are out. So it should be fun time.
Great.
I'll send you the flyer, Roberta, once I finish it and translate it.
Thank you. And I'll forward that to everyone.
And
Curious, John, how did the construction of those 2 water fountain projects turn out? I remember that was one I was incredulous about.
I need to double check with Estella, who's the project manager on that. I think he hasn't complained about the budget at all, so I think there's definitely going to be funds to be returned. I just don't know how well we were. At one point, we were concerned, maybe we just do one of the water fountains if we can't afford both of them, but we were able to afford both of them, and kind of do some nice work around them. So I think there'll probably be some money to return. But I'll talk to Estella and see now that we know we're wrapping up the project, we kind of know all the loose ends about it.
Cool.
And one last event that's probably incoming is that we'll also be having a groundbreaking for the Blessing of the Bayshore Drive project that Meg's working on. Flyer incoming as well.
Excellent.
I don't know a date for that just yet.
In other words, PSEF has been working really hard and has a lot to celebrate.
It's that time of the year. We're always flooded with ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings this time in September.
Very
Yeah.
good. All right. Any last items here before we adjourn, folks? Okie doke. With that, can we have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
And a second?
Can that?
Thank you. Roberta, please call the roll.
Yeah. David Turin,
Yes.
Michael McNelly,
Aye.
Rona Fishman,
Yes.
Joe Capuano,
Yes.
John Bronnenkamp,
Yes.
Carlos Ayala,
Yes.
Eric Parks,
Yes.
and Ryan Kirchhoff.
Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
Brian.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Roberta.
Good night.
Good night, all.